Well, hi there. My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Niterary. So you may have noticed that I basically took last week off. Essentially, with all of the Black Lives Matter protests happening across the United States and around the world, I felt that it was the most respectful thing I could do. As someone who's relatively new to social media as a whole and doesn't have a large following, I didn't feel that it would be helpful for me to continue to make my regular content in an attempt to signal boost. Rather, I felt that basically asking people to pay attention to me, especially over on Twitter, would not have been tasteful or correct. Similarly, making YouTube videos to post last week, just going on as if nothing had happened, felt like the wrong choice. Making YouTube videos centering myself in the issue and being like, here are books by Black authors that I recommend, also didn't feel like the correct thing to do. Again, as someone who's new to social media, I'm trying to navigate this new space. Basically, I've been taking this week to consider what real active allyship looks like in contrast to performative or nominal allyship. And so I basically took the last week to think about how to continue to integrate that real active allyship into my life and my work going forward on a day-to-day level. I will be leaving links in the description to various resources. I'm not going to enumerate them now because I'm filming this a few days in advance and I want them to be up to date as of when the video is posted. But for now, I will say please donate if you can. Please set up a recurring monthly donation if you can. If you've begun to engage in the hard conversations, please continue to engage in those conversations, because police violence and systemic racism and injustice don't just matter when they're trending or when they're in the headlines, they matter all the time. The conversation about meaningful, helpful, active allyship that we've been having over the past week is a conversation and a practice that should continue throughout our day-to-day lives. I'm doing my best to hold myself accountable in those ways and to make meaningful and concrete steps to be and become as good of an ally as I can be constantly, not just today, not just this week, but all the time, and I would call upon you to do the same. With all of that said, it's time to film my May wrap-up. In May, I read 17 books for a total of 5,610 pages, which comes out to an average of exactly 330 pages per book. As far as genre breakdown, I'm still having kind of a hard time classifying all of the books that I read, but I think what I'm going to try to do going forward is classify the book based on the aspect of it that compelled me to pick it up in the first place. In terms of genre, I read 5 romance novels, 3 speculative fiction novels, 3 classics or modern classics, 2 thrillers, 2 nonfiction books, and 2 sort of upmarket literary or general fiction books. And the average age of books I read was about 22 and a half years, which oddly enough is exactly how old I am. But the mode release year of books that I read in May was still 2019. I read 5 2019 releases, or almost a third of my reading total. I said last month that I thought I was reading an unusual amount of YA, and I think that this month I've confirmed that that is true, because this month I only read 2 YA books out of the 17 books I read total, so that is a significant decrease. So I want to experiment with a few different ways to structure my monthly wrap-ups to see which one I like best and to see which one you guys like best, so please do leave your feedback down below. Last month I went through the books basically in chronological order that I read them, starting with the first of the month and going forward. This month I'm going to try to talk about the books grouped by genre. Basically, because I know I read broadly and I know that you might only be interested in reading certain genres, the idea is that I can leave timestamps in the description and you can skip to different sections of the video to only hear about the books that you care about. I hope you'll let me know if you like it down below. And now to get into the actual books. I read 5 romance novels this month. First up, we have a historical romance, which is An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. This is about a young Black formerly enslaved woman with an eidetic memory who is now using her talents to serve as a spy for the Union during the Civil War. And she basically crosses paths with a white detective who is working in the same area as her. And the book is about them working to unravel a Confederate plot while falling in love with each other, but negotiating what it would mean for them to engage in an interracial relationship at this period of history. I like this a lot. I gave it 4 stars. Something I think I learned from this book is that I really appreciate when a romance novel has actual stakes from the external circumstances that aren't just about the internal angst of each of the characters. I also think that something this did spectacularly well was navigating and explicitly having the conversations about the power imbalance that this relationship carries along with it, what it would mean for a Black woman to become involved with a white man. As much as it's a romance novel, it doesn't romanticize the historical past in which it's set. There were some parts of it where I felt like the external plot about the two of them being spies felt a little bit slow or stalled, but that does make sense because it's a genre romance, and so the plot is the two of them having feelings for each other and talking to each other and developing a relationship. Like, that is the central plot. But I did find that the external circumstances being what they were made me care about the couple even more. I thought that the navigation of power dynamics was really expertly done, really important, really thoughtful. And again, I think it does a really good job of being a historical novel that doesn't romanticize the past, but that is still hopeful about people's capacity to do and be good. This is my first Alyssa Cole, and I will definitely be continuing to read more by her. Almost totally different in tone, I read a sort of quasi-historical, like steampunk paranormal romance, which was Soulless by Gail Carriger. This was really fun. The authorial voice worked really well for me. The humor in most cases worked pretty well for me. It was just sort of something fun and fluffy, entertaining to read of an evening. It reminded me in a lot of ways of what I enjoy in Terry Pratchett books. It was almost sort of that style of humor. The central premise of the book is basically that the British Empire is weird, and what if its historical weirdness was explained by the fact that vampires and werewolves and ghosts revealed themselves, and British society integrated them into their political and social fabric in a number of ways, and that is what allowed them to become an empire, if I remember correctly. Steampunk is always a bit of a weird genre because it does imagine a world where imperialism is successful and thriving. There are almost always colonialist, imperialist, racist underpinnings to a steampunk book, which I just feel should be acknowledged. But there were some things about this reimagining of the past that were interesting and sort of funny, like the reason young women need to have chaperones at all times is so that they're not picked off by roving vampires. But basically our central character, Alexia, is a bit of an outcast. She's kind of on the shelf, as they say. She's a little bit of a spinster, and she also happens to be a preternatural, or a person born without a soul, so she neutralizes a lot of the powers of vampires and werewolves, etc., by touching them. I really didn't know how to categorize this, so there's like a mystery plot engine where she's trying to figure out something bad that's happening with all of these supernatural creatures. But then there's also a romance with this werewolf who's like the head of supernatural affairs or something. This was funny. It was fun. It's over 10 years old and it's a little bit of its time. Like, there's a side character in the book who basically is a walking, like, flamboyant gay best friend stereotype, which irked me a little bit, but didn't seem like it was coming from a malicious place. I'm kind of undecided about whether to continue with this series or not. But overall, it was just sort of fluffy and campy and fun, so if you're looking for fluffy, campy fun, it delivered on that front, and I gave it like 3 stars. Okay, I also read 3 contemporary romances. First, I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. This I also gave 3 stars. I'm still kind of trying to figure out if I even like contemporary romance, which is a weird thing to say considering that I read 3 of them this month. What I think I'm concluding is that, like, if it doesn't have some kind of an extra hook to it, like each of the other contemporary romances that I'm going to talk about, it doesn't do that much for me personally. I think that's my hypothesis. So yeah, this was an example of, I can sort of objectively see that this relationship is really cute, and I can objectively see that this book was doing a lot of good and useful things. A lot of people appreciate this book for its diversity. The main character, Chloe, is Black and fat and disabled. I'm not qualified to comment on the accuracy of representation for chronic illness or disability in this book because it's not something I personally deal with, but I will say that I noticed that a lot of other books that I have read, especially YA with a chronically ill or disabled main character, kind of end up leaving you with the implication that a chronically ill or disabled life is not worth living. It's not worth taking care of themselves, whereas this book, to my reading, doesn't fall into that at all. Chloe knows what she needs to do to take care of herself. She wants to make sure she's not cloistering herself, holding herself back from experiences out of fear, but she knows that some things are harder for her than other people, and the book doesn't write that out of the story. To my reading, it doesn't fall into certain ableist tropes that are common in fiction, but I would definitely suggest that you check out Own Voices reviews as well. So yes, I appreciated it for not falling into that pattern. I thought it was pretty cute, but something about this writing style did not agree with me on a fundamental level, especially the way the sex scenes were written. I had a really hard time with. It just didn't click with me as a reader. I can definitely see that what it's doing is valuable. It just wasn't 100% for me. 3 stars. The next contemporary romance I read was Undercover Bromance by Alyssa K. Adams, the sequel to the Bromance Book Club. If you did not like the Bromance Book Club because it was unrealistic, you are not going to like this book because it is 10 times less realistic. This basically follows Liv, who is the sister of the heroine of the Bromance Book Club, and Mac, who was the founder of the Bromance Book Club. Mac takes his girlfriend to the restaurant Liv works at for a celebration. Through a series of events, Liv ends up getting fired that night after witnessing her male boss harassing another female employee. The boss threatens to blacklist her, so she's trying to preserve her career, but also to get justice for the people that this man has been systematically harassing and abusing. And Mac basically swears to help her because he feels responsible for her losing her job. It's sort of a hate to love romance. The banter was really good. I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as the Bromance Book Club, but I was definitely rooting for the couple. This was a really fun, campy adventure. It doesn't have the interspersed sections from the romance novel that they're reading in it the way that the Bromance Book Club did, so if you didn't like that, it's not in this one. I did like it, so I kind of missed it a little bit. I really liked it. I thought it was cute. I didn't think it was as good as the first one, but I'll definitely be continuing in the series. 4 stars. Finally, we have my favorite romance of the month, which got like a 4.5, maybe a 5-star from me, and that was Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This is set in a small town where our heroine has come after being brutally dumped by her boyfriend to help her sister, who was in a car accident, and she's there to help look after her sister's kid, who wanted to do the Renaissance Fair this summer, so the heroine Emily ends up signing up for this Renaissance Fair. This is also sort of a enemies to lovers, banter heavy romance, and I really, really loved it. So it's all set around this Renaissance Fair, and it was giving me these really strong, like, nostalgic vibes for like summer community theater rehearsals where it's like hot and humid and everybody's walking around like half in costume and people just pull together to make a show happen. There was something about it that was conjuring up those like very specific, very like sensory memories for me, which I really loved. The 2 romantic leads are both Shakespeare nerds, so the banter was amazing. The one thing I will say about this book is that as a theater person, so the author uses the device of them playing these characters at this Renaissance Fair, which is a lot of improv, to sort of show that there's tension between these characters that they can't originally acknowledge, they can't acknowledge from the beginning. But some of the ways that she does this is by like staging a scene where the 2 romantic leads, they kiss in character, but it's improv. And they didn't have any sort of communication before the scene or before the fair about how far physical contact between them would go. And it just didn't 100% sit right with me. It like literally says in the book that she like feels like she has to go along with it because there's an audience there in front of patrons, and so she lets it happen, and that made me uncomfortable. As a theater person, like that's not best practice. Similarly, the male lead Simon is part of this big like stage combat fight, the human chess match, and the author tries to show his developing feelings through how the chess match goes at certain points. And like, again, as a theater person, that is dangerous. Altering fight choreography or performing it at a different level of speed or intensity because you're under the influence of emotions in the moment is something you're explicitly not supposed to do, because it really is dangerous. Because the thing is that you practice doing a fake punch a million times to set up the illusion. But if you do a fake punch wrong, it can turn into a real punch. So I appreciated that the author was using this device of the like improv, environmental theater, stage combat, etc. to teach us about the characters and their feelings and what they don't want to admit verbally. That is all clever, but as a theater person watching it made me uncomfortable, if that makes any sense. because basically it was actors behaving badly. But yeah, this was super, super sweet, made me super nostalgic, actually made me tear up at the end, which I don't think a romance novel has ever done before. So yeah, maybe 5 stars, maybe like 4.8 stars, I don't know. Okay, moving on to speculative fiction. First, I'm going to talk about a YA contemporary with like science fiction elements, and that is We Are the Ants by Shaun Hutchinson. This was, I think, the first book that I read in the month, and since then I have seen some things online about this author's new book and response to that book by people of color who have reviewed it, and then the author's response to their concerns, which is basically to ignore them, to block them, to silence them, and pretend that it's not happening, which is not a response that I endorse. I'll link one of the reviews down below. So I'm not going to talk about this book for a long time. I'm not endorsing this author at this moment because of the way that he's responded to criticism of his book, but yeah, I read this because it has been an extremely hyped queer YA book on BookTube for a very long time. A lot of people that I followed when I first got into the community said it was one of their favorite books of all time. Here's what I thought about it. This was fine. This was very angsty. The plot of this is basically that our main character has been getting abducted by aliens for a few years, and then these aliens show him a button and lead him to understand that if he presses the button, the Earth will be saved from some kind of destruction. But if he doesn't press the button, the Earth will be destroyed. But his life is kind of hard. His boyfriend had died by suicide. His family just isn't doing that well. So he has a lot of crap going on in his life. And so the whole book is about him trying to decide whether he wants to push this button and save the Earth or not. And there's also a developing male-male romance between him and a love interest. And like, I get that the whole premise of the book is that he's depressed and so he can't decide whether life is worth living, but extrapolating that out to a planetary scale, that level of selfishness really didn't sit well with me, that he was like, well, I'm a teenager and I know that life's not worth living for anyone. It just kind of bothered me. I think if I were a teenager still, I might have really liked this book, but even just a few years past the target age demographic, I found it kind of overly angsty and off-putting. And again, at this present moment, I do not feel comfortable endorsing this author to you. 3 stars at maximum, maybe 2.5. The other YA book I read this month was a fantasy. It was The Bone Witch by Ren Chupeco. This was an Asian readathon pick. So this is a book about Taya, whose brother dies, but then she accidentally resurrects him at his funeral, revealing that she is a bone witch, and then she goes away to sort of train with the other witches of this society. It's not good that I've already forgotten a lot of the lore, and also there are these fearsome beasts that it's the job of these bone witches to subdue. It's told in 2 timelines, one of which starts with the events that I talked about, the other of which is told from sort of the end point of her narrative. You see her preparing to do something really big, and she's telling the whole story of how she got there. The frustrating thing about the plot of this book is that it doesn't stand on its own as a book. You have to continue reading in the series to understand what happens, because the 2 narratives don't converge by the end of the book. You don't catch up to the future narrative in the past narrative at all. So the plot was really, really unsatisfying to me. Otherwise, the writing was really clumsy in a weird way. Because I read everything this month in ebook, basically, I was letting a lot of things slide. Occasional typos, I'd be like, that could be because I got an ebook version of this from the library. This was also on a sentence level, the writing was weird. Like, there were some sentences that just did not make sense, and I was like, shouldn't an editor have caught this? Like, just idioms misused, or sentences where pronouns referred to really weird things, almost like misplaced modifiers, just like confusingly written sentences that would definitely take me out of the story. The writing is very heavy on sensory detail. There's a lot of description of clothing and food and etc. I appreciated that this wasn't your like basic fantasy novel set in like disguised medieval England. It definitely has a more multicultural feel than that, with inspiration drawn from a lot of non-Western cultures in particular. I'm currently planning to continue in the series, but mostly because I didn't get a conclusion to the plot in the first book. So I feel like I need to read the whole trilogy to be able to judge the plot of the text, which is not my favorite feeling. That irks me when authors do that. But anyway, doesn't stand on its own, be advised. like 3 stars. Okay, my last speculative book was a sort of literary science fiction dystopian novel, which was Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which was another of my picks for the Asian Readathon. This was translated from the Japanese just last year by Stephen Snyder. This was really, really good. High 4 stars. This is about an island where somehow the memory police are able to disappear things from your memory. And what that actually means is that you no longer have any emotional association with that object. So if a bird was disappeared from your memory, you would still be able to see it if it flew overhead, but you wouldn't have any information about it, and you wouldn't have any memories about it, and you wouldn't have any emotions about it. And basically the main character of this book is a novelist, just sort of trying to survive in this environment, and she ends up taking in someone who's immune to these effects, who the memory police can't alter his memories. And you think that that's going to be the premise to like an adventure of some kind, but really it's not. This is basically a slice of life novel of a woman trying to exist in these conditions, and having more and more things successively taken from her. So it's a profoundly melancholy novel. She's a novelist, as I said, so you get excerpts of her work, and it's really, really fascinating to see the way that she's synthesizing the atmosphere of loss that she lives in into her work. So if you like book within a book things, this has that going on. The writing was really beautiful. Like, props to both the author and the translator, because it is this really smooth prose with just the right amount of lyricism to evoke really strong emotion without calling attention to itself as like, I am a literary device, like, look at me, it's a metaphor. It's really smooth and fluid, I think, while feeling really quiet and stripped down in some ways too. And this was a book that, like, after I finished it, I just needed to like sit with it for a minute, because in some ways it's about memory, but what it's really about is loss. And I guess how loss and memory are interlinked, because if you can't remember the thing that you lost, it doesn't matter at all. What loss is the absence of something that you used to have or that you want. And it's that wanting, that yearning for a prior state that is the feeling of loss. But if you can't remember the prior state, can't form an emotional connection to it, you keep losing, but it doesn't touch you. This was one that, like, if you've read this, I really want to talk about this book, because this was amazing. Had a huge emotional impact on me. It's not like other dystopian novels that you read where you eventually find out why the government felt the need to be this way, or how the changes started, or what's going to happen. There's no revolution, and you never know why this is all being enacted. Definitely one to make you think. Really beautiful book. I recommend it a lot. Okay, I also read 2 thrillers in May, the first of which is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. I liked this one a lot. This was like a 4-star thriller, which is kind of rare for me for a thriller to get more than 3 stars. This is set at a camp, and basically our main character, when she went to that camp as a child, all of her bunkmates in her cabin disappeared one day, and nobody's ever figured out where they went. The camp was closed down for years, but the owner of the camp invites her to come back that summer, the summer that the book is set in, to serve as sort of a teacher, a counselor at the camp, and it goes from there. I'm not going to say any more. I really liked this one. There was a big twist in this one that I didn't call until the page that it happened on, which was really nice. I think that's the perfect time for you to figure out a twist, is the second before it's revealed. I guess I liked the outdoor camp setting, like, as a camping person. Good sense of suspense, interesting exploration of like female friendship. The one thing that this kind of made me wonder about was, like, I would just love to ask the author what made him interested in telling these kinds of stories, because for me, I understand why I'm interested in reading stories about like relationships between sisters or complex female friendship. Like, that makes sense based on my lived experience. I just kind of want to ask him what it is that draws him to those stories, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that he does anything wrong by writing books centered on female characters, or that he shouldn't be doing that. Just it makes me curious why that's what he's drawn to. But yeah, that's a really good thriller. I recommend that one. That was like 4 stars. The second thriller I read was An Anonymous Girl by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. This one didn't do quite as much for me. This is more a 3-star read. It's about a girl who decides to participate in a psychology research study for some extra cash, and then her relationship with the person conducting the study becomes more and more intense, and things sort of progress from there. I did not find the ending satisfying at all. The writing was not great. It was actively clunky at a lot of points that sort of drew me out from the story. Also, they decided to write large portions of the book in the second person, and also a lot of those sections are written in the passive voice. The thing with making a bold stylistic choice like that is that you invite further scrutiny on your sentence level writing, and it did not always stand up to that scrutiny. Even in terms of consistent application of those stylistic choices in those sections of the book, I wanted a lot more from the ending, but overall it was pretty suspenseful and entertaining, even if not perfectly executed, so like 3 stars. I read 2 nonfiction books in the month of May. The first of which was a self-help title called Atomic Habits, An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones by James Clear. This is basically what it sounds like. It's a book about habit formation, and it tells you how to build habits. It uses science to tell you how to do that. It's pretty useful. If the habits you're looking to build or break are from a set of common ones, there are a lot of concrete suggestions about how to do that in the book. But yeah, I'm not reading this one. It was fine. The other nonfiction book that I read in May was A Walk in the Woods, Rediscovering America on the Appalachian Trail by Bill Bryson. I actually did an entire video reviewing this book as someone who has personally hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. So I'm not going to talk about it here. If you want my short version, this book felt like swinging wildly back and forth between 2 extremes. On one end you have like, yes, this is totally it, this guy gets it, he gets it, and on the other end it was like, no, he doesn't get it at all. And you were over on this side, on the he doesn't get it side, way more often for way more of the book. So if you like rant reviews, I have a 30-minute video talking about this one book. Okay, in May I read 3 classics, the oldest and first of which was The Odd Women by George Gissing. I participated in the Odd Readalong hosted by Katie and Marissa. Links and information in the description. Where basically we read 2 chapters of this book a day for the first 16 days in May. And this was a really interesting book. So it's basically about the odd or unpaired, unmatched, unmarried women in Victorian England at the end of the 19th century. And basically you have a large ensemble cast of characters. There's no real clear protagonist, and they're all sort of responding to this question of what an unmarried woman should do in different ways. It's really interesting. It almost feels like a survey of different societal attitudes towards this question, more so than the author advancing his particular agenda. If you read the book, there will be moments in it that will feel so startlingly progressive that you almost won't believe that it was written in 1893. As a proto-feminist text, it's really interesting to document the sort of rhetoric that people might have been using to talk to each other about the issue. Plot-wise, I really enjoyed it. I really like what classic novels can do, where they weave together many intersecting plot lines and characters. So yeah, it was entertaining to read, and it was really interesting to see how people might have been talking about gender 130 years ago. It was also an interesting reading experience. Breaking it up into sort of 2 chapter chunks, taking it a day at a time, was a really good way to get me into classics after I had sort of been neglecting them, which was my hope with starting the readathon. After that, I read a sort of modern classic or classic of genre fiction. This is The Black Moth by Georgette Heyer. It was published in 1921, though it was written earlier, and it's set in like the Georgian period. So it was historical fiction then, but now it's also old, so it's a classic historical romance novel, maybe? Georgette Heyer is basically one of the major founders, if not the major founder, of the historical romance, and in particular the Regency romance genres as we understand them today. So I've been interested to take a look at something of hers for some time now. With that said, I picked her first book, which it turns out she wrote while she was a teenager and published, I think, when she was only 18 or 19, and it shows. The Black Moth was interesting because it definitely feels more closely tied to romance in almost the original sense of the word. So if you've ever read a gothic romance by like Anne Radcliffe or something, it felt more closely tied to that than the romance novel genre conventions that we think of today. So while there is a central relationship in The Black Moth, you're told rather than shown that the parties fall in love with one another. There's one scene where they do flirt and it's really, really cute, but you only get the one scene, and then you're just sort of told that they love each other. So the focus is not on the development of their relationship so much as it is on the external plot elements. Overall, a good time, but almost in a way that you have to detach yourself from in order to enjoy. Like, it's a little too over the top to take seriously, but it's enjoyable. I do have to say that it really bothered me that the main antagonist was not effectively punished more than he was. Like, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but he basically has what sounds like a practice of like abducting young women, and everyone's like, oh, that scoundrel, that rascal, you know how he is with his women. And I was like, no, like, somebody take this man to task. But again, it was written in 1920 and it was written by a teenager, so better than anything I could have written as a teenager in 1920. The other sort of classic of genre fiction that I read this month was The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is her first published novel and also her first Poirot novel, and this is also one of my picks for my 10 for the 20s project. So our narrator Hastings goes to stay with an old friend, but then that old friend's mother is murdered, and you have to figure out what happened. And so there's all this stuff about the will and the poison, and there's all these red herrings, and there's a fairly large cast of characters, and it was a good time. I think the twist at the end of this is really good. I really liked it. So this was only my second Christie. I'd only ever read And Then There Were None, and I was interested to explore more of her work, and I definitely think I will keep going. I really enjoyed the moments where Poirot was teasing Hastings and Hastings didn't see it, and it also felt like there were times when the author was teasing Hastings and Hastings didn't see it. Very entertaining and a lot of fun. But yes, overall I enjoyed this as a short, quick, twisty mystery novel and my foray into the rest of Agatha Christie's work. And finally, we will talk about the contemporary / general fiction that I read. First up was my last pick for the Asian Readathon, which was Read Jane by Patricia Park. Basically, this was a Jane Eyre retelling set in New York, and it follows a young Korean American woman named Jane who was expecting to get a job after college, but now she's back working in her uncle's grocery store. But she eventually takes a position as a live-in nanny with a sort of wealthy Brooklyn couple, which is sort of where the Rochester parallel comes in. It's ultimately a story about her sort of finding herself and deciding who she wants to be and what kind of life she wants to live. I think this is probably a very good book about a biracial woman navigating diasporic identity. It's probably a very good novel about a Korean American woman negotiating the Korean and American parts of her identity. She spends time in both New York and in Korea. It's probably very good at all of those things. It is a very, very bad Jane Eyre retelling. And as that is primarily what drew me into the book, I was interested to see the story of Jane Eyre and the character of Jane Eyre in interacting with all of those other factors that I just mentioned. It really didn't do the trick. So there were just several key points in the book as a retelling that really didn't work for me, because what I was looking for was a retelling of a story that I love so much, and elements of that story that I love so much and the things that made me love it were frankly not present in this version of the story. I think she does a good job of exploring what it means to be starved for love, which I think both Jane Eyre and Jane in this book really are, but I don't think the Jane in this book has the confidence in her convictions and the sort of moral strength that the Jane in Jane Eyre has from the beginning, and so she doesn't feel recognizably like Jane Eyre. And because that's what I was looking for from the book, I found myself very disappointed. The character of Jane Eyre is supremely central to the success of Jane Eyre as a novel, and that character being unrecognizable and far less likable in this version made it difficult to get on board with the book. It didn't feel like a satisfying retelling, and I was really disappointed. And the other literary fiction book that I read in May, and the final book I will be talking about for this wrap-up, is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a book about a young Black woman who babysits for a wealthy white family. She is trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She has a couple of part-time jobs, but she doesn't know what she wants to do with her career. So one night there's an emergency at the house of the family she babysits for, and she's asked to take the toddler that she takes care of out for a little while so they can sort it out. She takes her to this grocery store that they go hang out at all the time, and basically someone decides to get the store security involved and accuse the main character of kidnapping this child. And it becomes this whole incident. But that night she meets someone who films the incident and offers to send it to her. And that night her employer, the mother of the child that she babysits for, becomes obsessed with becoming this young woman's friend and making up to her for what has happened. It's about these two white people, the man that she meets in the grocery store that night and the woman who employs her, trying to use this woman to make themselves feel like they are good people. It is really, really interesting. Really, really well written. The prose is very light and fluid and easy to read, even if the subject matter is not always easy to read. This is a really excellent book. It reminded me of Zadie Smith in some ways, the writing and the sort of narrative structure of the book, the way that things sort of turn out to be intimately interconnected with one another, which might be a turnoff for some people, but it's something that I really like. It's just really, really interesting investigation of privilege and microaggression, written in a really fluid, almost sort of sparkly prose style that I really enjoyed. So highly recommend. Okay, I've been talking forever. Hopefully I can edit this down to a concise wrap up. Let me know about your favorite book that you read in May. If you had a good time here, I hope you will consider subscribing. And once again, I would encourage you to check out the links in the description for resources you can use and actions you can take to continue to create a world that is just for all, a world in which we act like Black Lives Matter, because they do. I truly hope that everyone is staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere out there is a great book waiting just for you. Bye.